the growth that women's sport is going through. It's not just sort of ticking along year on year. This is going exponential. NWSL franchises in America are selling for $50 million.
Yeah. Got invited to be on the Women's Super League commercial committee as well. Had a big involvement in kind of like a lot of their big central deals. To see it from where it was to where it is today is unbelievable.
We've done some business. Look, Alicia Lehman, she's probably the highest profile women's footballer on the planet. 16 million followers, we've done sponsorship deals for her.
Welcome to the Deal Room Sport, then the Sporting Group International and Sporting Jobs. My name's Ed, I'm the host, going to be asking the questions. As usual, we have our panel here. We've got Adrian and Ian, we've got Harry as well. How are you, gents, all right?
Yeah, very, very good.
Good. Yeah, no, very well, thank you very much. Now, the main subject today is women's sport and those sponsorship opportunities that we can get from it as well. Before we get into that, though, we're also going to meet one of the team as well from behind the scenes from Sporting Group International. Let's talk about what's happening in your worlds right now. What deals, what are you working on? What job are you placing at the moment? Adrian, what's happening in your world over the last couple of weeks?
Well, it's been a bit of a rollercoaster, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, there's lots going on. There's a lot of planning going on for 2026. We're considering moving into another market, which will be announced, I'm sure, pretty soon.
It's all quite secretive at the moment, is it?
It's very secretive.
Interesting.
Yeah. We're going to blow the markets in that territory.
Okay.
So we're just going through that phase. We're also just trying to create a few more connections in other territories we aren't in. But there's loads of Ian has got lots of live conversations that are getting very, very close to conversion. So I think, it's going to be a really good end to 25. I'm sure Ian and Harry will give you an overview of what's coming, as much as we can give you, that is.
Well, this is it. I mean, as I say, it sounds like a lot of it's under wraps still at the moment.
It's very, very high level.
Love it. Ian, as UK Managing Director, what's happening in your world right now?
Yeah, no, as I mentioned, we've got a lot going on. So hopefully, touch wood, 2025 in the end is going to be very, very strong. Obviously, can't go into too much detail because a lot of stuff we're talking about is confidential, but across the group, actually, not just here in the UK, in Europe, in India, there's probably the best part of 5 or 6 good, strong quality deals across various different sports. Hopefully, touch wood, ready to be announced on the next podcast, potentially, or maybe towards the back end of the year anyway. But lots going on. As well as that, we are going for a whole new sort of like rebrand, looking at potentially new websites, that kind of stuff as well, just to make sure that that's fresh, looking the part, and we keep being innovative and being creative as well. So lots going on, but really exciting times at the minute.
These deals then, I know you can't say too much about them. Are they long-term, like multi-year deals? What kind of structure is there to them? Or can you say anything?
Come on, give us some.
Exactly. Come on, give me something.
Varying. So there's some short deals. There's some more long-term deals.
It's so
like a politician, isn't it?
I mean, come on.
I don't know what more I can say.
He's announcing the budget next week.
Doesn't feel like that, yeah.
I don't know what more I can say, but they're very varied. They genuinely are very varied, and we like it that way. We don't want to, I suppose our passion, because we've all been involved in the game, is always been football, but we've always made it very clear that we don't just stop at football. We work across all various different sports, and I think we proved that in the deals that we've done previously with Battle of the Beasts, with the PDC, but I can't give too much away, Ed. I'm really, really sorry, but they are very varied. They are very different, and they're going to be really cool when they're announced. So watch this space.
And I think one thing, just giving Ian and the team some plaudits. One thing that we've seen a massive shift change is literally the collaborative deal across the group. So as you know, we've got representatives in various territories around the globe. The amount of business we're doing collectively, as in someone in a territory has identified an opportunity and brought it into the UK, or the UK has identified an opportunity for another territory, and we're working on deals live together. It's obviously the commission around what comes with it is a kind of like a shared arrangement, but I think everybody's cool about that. But I think the one thing that we've seen is that whole original plan 2.5 years ago to get the brand of SGI into multiple territories with people representing, now working as one, is like all of a sudden those barriers are down, which is probably what I wasn't expecting. I was expecting it to be very much silo driven. Right, Diego in Spain would do Spain, Pranay and Danesh would do India.
Oh, it's not like that at all, is it really?
It's absolutely the opposite. And it's like, I'm delighted that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, I speak to Diego, Pranay, Danesh, just been on the phone to them actually just before this start of this podcast, literally 4 or 5 times a day, just as much as everyone else here in the UK. And it's the same with Harry and Altab from his team as well, so, it's a really good quality structure that we've got.
Excellent. Well, Harry, I'll come to you. I'm hoping I can get something concrete out of
I'll give you more than Ian will.
From Sporting Jobs. Yeah, what can you tell me?
No, we've had a good week. In the last 24, 48 hours, we've had an offer for a head of medical at an EFL football club. We've had an offer this week for a CFO of, I'd say, one of the biggest football clubs in the pyramid, which is really exciting. I hope we can get that over the line and some exciting press release around that, I hope, maybe towards Christmas time. We placed Francesca Van Ark this week, who started at Aston Villa, my club I support, which is always nice to do deals with Villa. Yeah. And she's moved over from Manchester United. Really credible candidate that came. I just saw the response to her announcing it on LinkedIn this morning, and she's had about 1,000 comments on it, which always speaks volumes for Francesca. So, no, I'm chuffed to have worked with her on that. All whilst juggling a 5-week-old baby at the moment. So if I do look a bit tired on the podcast, Adrian had me back in work the day after. You know what it's like.
You're looking good. You're looking good.
Paternity leave. He did have.
I'm joking.
Oh, fair enough. Okay. Oh, some good stuff happening there. We'll get into the main subject shortly, but next we are going to meet one of the team behind Sporting Group International and Sporting Jobs. Well, this is kind of a new section, really, of the Deal Room, where we get a chance to meet one of the team from Sporting Group International or Sporting Jobs. So, Adrian, if you do the honours, tell us about Lucy.
Yep. Lucy's joined us very recently, come into the business as executive assistant to me, assisting me with multiple tasks. I think Lucy's probably found that my diary and my focus sometimes can be a little bit erratic. But yeah, Lucy's joined us, massive help for me and the team, wider team, just to get us all organised and make sure we're efficient and going back to people in the right time frames.
Tell us about yourself then, Lucy. How did you come to Sporting Jobs and Sporting Group International?
So I've just finished uni in Wembley. I studied football business, and then I'm yet to graduate in December, actually.
Okay.
And I've been looking for a job in sports. And my dad knew Adrian through my dad doing work for him, and put us in touch. And then we were arranging calls.
Yeah, that let you down on.
Yeah, and Adrian was
regularly.
late, and I was like, I wonder what he's doing. And then, funnily enough, my mum went, "Oh, maybe he needs an assistant." And then, the next call, Adrian was like, "Would you be open to doing this position?" And I was like, "Absolutely." So now, so far since I've been here, I don't think you've missed a call.
No. No call, no meeting.
Well, with any of them. So yeah, that's how I ended up here.
Excellent. So tell us about your degree. What degree were you doing?
So I did football business. Which
so what exactly did you get from that then? What's that all about?
So the uni I went to, UCFB, there's many different degrees to do with, but they're all football. So there was football business, which I did, football finance, football marketing, football media, football law, coaching. So it was quite football based. So I just did the standard one where I did a bit of everything. So finance, media, marketing, a little bit of law here and there. So I kind of just got a good overview of all the different sectors, to be honest, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to go into. And then originally I wanted to go into player care, but actually since being here, I've seen a lot more sponsorship, which I've never really thought of before. It's weird because you see it everywhere. You don't actually put two and two together. So actually coming here, it's opened a whole new chapter of what actually goes on, of sponsorships, front of shirt, stadium rights, everything. So yeah, sponsorship's been really interesting actually.
Now, the main part of this podcast episode is kind of about women's sport and the sponsorship opportunities of it. Is that something you kind of looked into when you're at university? Have you noticed the growth in that? Because it feels like there's a real opportunity in that market at the moment.
Yeah, so we actually did an assignment on women in governance in sport. And that was really interesting, seeing all the different statistics and things of how much it's grown, but also how much there is still to go for it. So in my class, out of 20 people, there was 5 girls, which is obviously quite low, but I would say we were probably louder than the boys. Like we were more opinionated than them, which I think you kind of have to be when you're trying to, you know, push yourself into something that women aren't normally in. But definitely the years below, I was seeing a lot more girls. There was a lot more girls around, so that was really interesting to see. And sponsorship, yeah, it's since the Euros a few years ago, it's just picked up massively, and I feel like clubs quite had to jump on that trend, and I think they did, which they had to, because, you know, it was quite big at the time. And I think they have, and I'm an Arsenal fan, and I've definitely seen Arsenal women everywhere. You know, obviously they share a stadium with the men's. They're all on the photo shoots. Ian Wright, obviously, really being a big advocate for it. And sponsorships that you wouldn't have seen a few years ago. So even watching the games the other day, on the boards going round, there was like clothes washing companies, and it had got like mud stains, grass stains, and then period stains. And obviously you wouldn't have seen that, and that wouldn't have been advocated, I guess, if the women weren't coming forward. Because like I said to you guys yesterday, it's something that you probably don't think about, women wearing white shorts, but obviously it is. They're looking to change that in some aspects, because obviously that's quite a big impact. So even sponsorships like that, I think, are really good. Really putting it out there that, you know, it's not just mud and grass that's getting stained, it's everything. So yeah, I think that's been pretty positive, but I do still think there's a long way to go.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, Lucy, it's been a pleasure having you on the
Thank you.
podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Cheers.
Right, let's get into the main part of the podcast then. So this episode is very much a focus on women's sport sponsorship and where that market's going, where it's been as well. And as I understand it, Adrian's going to give us a little history lesson on women's sport, which is nice.
Well, I'm not. ChatGPT.
Okay, all right, go on then.
I've got to look, women's sport and certainly football, I can only talk about an industry that I've had executive experience in. I've come from two clubs that, you know, I'm not going to, you know, name any names, but I've come from two clubs very early on in the kind of like the rebirth or the commercialisation, or however you want to term the phrase, around women's football. Was very much a kind of like, well, you know, why should we do it? There's not an audience for it. It was kind of, it wasn't anti, but it was very much, yeah, okay, well, let's see. And that was quite interesting, really, because, you know, I used to have people come to me when I was in clubs, certainly in representing the women's teams of the clubs I worked at, saying, look, you know, why can't we work a little bit closer with the club? What is the blocker? You know, why, you know, generally it was about money, a lot of it, you know, which is literally, okay, it's got a P&L, it needs to pay people, it needs to move up and down the country to play games. And I think generally there was always that kind of, well, okay, what's the return? But I think if you were to ask the people that were in those clubs going back, you know, 15, 20 years, to ask them this question now, like, you know, maybe it wasn't an error, but it was probably just not kind of like a foresight for them. But you've only got to look at what's going on, you know, it's to kind of, the sponsorships are rivaling some of the men's stuff. You look at the women's international space, the brands are stellar.
Yeah.
They are stellar brands.
They're better than the men's team, aren't they?
Yeah. And I think so. What's really interesting, and a lot of people talk about this, as a fan in that women football space, is the match day experience is another level in terms of, it's just completely different. There's more dwell time. It's more kind of friendly. It's not so kind of, you know, you don't feel so uptight about going, you know, it's just literally a good experience. And I think, you know, there are, you know, the younger generation of people coming through that, as where, you know, they're given the opportunity to play in school, they're given the opportunity to play for local clubs, where that wasn't the case, you know, 20 years ago. It was like, actually, it was like you get kids that wanted to play, girls that wanted to play, and they'd have to get changed in their car because they've got a group of 11, 12 boys that were getting changed in the changing rooms. And, you know, it's like, it's come on a massive way.
Yeah.
And what stat I did want to give you
go on.
was just in terms of, I didn't know this, but there was a group of ladies called the Victorian Rebels.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they were the first women. They were the first women to play matches in the UK, and believe it or not, they were getting bigger attendances than the men in that period.
Wow,
Admittedly, it's going back to the to 1881 to 1895.
So what kind of attendances are we talking about?
Oh, they were like
matches
50, 60,000.
God, wow.
So anyway, so the FA decided to ban women from playing football For 50 years.
50 years.
Yeah. Lucy reminded me to say, well, actually, Adrian, it's 50 years. And the only reason I know that is the year my mum was born.
Makes me feel old just saying that's her mum was born in 1970. Okay, right. Okay, so what do you think was the catalyst, though, to get women's sport to where it is now and those sponsorship opportunities? I mean, the obvious one is the Lionesses winning the Euros in 2022. Has it been a gradual process, or was there one big moment like that?
It's quite a timely sort of period at the moment, because I think if you look at the moment in cricket, rugby and football, the women's teams are all having great successes. They won the Women's World Cup.
Yep.
We made the final of the Cricket World Cup, or the semi-final of the Cricket World Cup. So again, all sort of on all fronts having real success there.
Well, from England's side, we are very much, I mean, women's sport across the board is actually a lot more successful than the men's, really. You could argue, couldn't you? But do you think as a global game, do you think we're finding this in other countries, that it's becoming more prominent and actually there's more opportunity from sponsorship side as well? Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I've had quite an extensive experience working directly in the women's game and helping the growth, certainly in football. But I think there's more opportunity across the whole landscape of sport for women, across all sports. You know, you've only got to look at, you know, what's happening in darts at the moment with Beau Greaves, you know, obviously the stuff that's happening with the England Roses, like Harry's already alluded to. You know, I think just girls in particular are just getting more and more opportunity. And that's not just in actual elite sport and playing the game. You know, when you actually look in the inner sanctum, in the business side of sport, you're seeing a lot more female engagement. You know, physios, doctors, coaches, referees, you know, lines people.
Big
you know,
senior executive roles as well, you know, from a recruitment standpoint.
100%, you know, and it's really refreshing to see. You know, I've got a young 15-year-old daughter, you know, and I want my daughter to have exactly the same opportunities that any other 15, 16-year-old boy should have, and why not? And it's brilliant to see. And as Adrian's alluded to, the fact that schools are embracing it, colleges are embracing it, people from all different backgrounds, everyone, you know, men are embracing it. It's brilliant to see. Still a long way to go, but it's just getting better and better and better.
Just on that as well, sorry. I think, again, from a recruitment side of things, we're seeing so many like women's specific team roles come up. So a lot of women's football teams now have a chief exec or an MD. People like Sarah Batters, who came from Southampton in a commercial role, now the MD of London City Lionesses. And Sarah's like a perfect example that she was always destined to a role like that. And it's amazing that these women's teams now have an opportunity for people like that in leadership positions. And again, within our team, across myself, Max and Alex at the moment, we're seeing such a big influx of women's-specific team roles, not just commercially, but women, you know, a marketing role for the women's team, even actually in that sort of pathway on the performance side. There's now like a whole system around scouting, coaching that's developing in the women's game as well. So that's going to just continue and continue, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I suppose previously it would have been two separate teams. I think you were saying this, Adrian, weren't you? Almost, they were kind of under the same umbrella, but actually not really involved with the club particularly at all. Whereas to have pretty much two sets of clubs with all those individual roles, there's a lot. It must be trickier to manage those different moving parts.
I was going to kind of ask that. When you guys were commercial directors of Premier League teams or football clubs, was there a women's inventory that you were just responsible for within your team, or how did that kind of work? Or?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. I want to bring this up actually. So Birmingham City Football Club, I've had quite a lot of involvement in this. We were one of the founders of the Women's Super League. So back in 2011, we had a very, very strong women's team, and a lot of that, to be perfectly honest, was down to the Chinese new Chinese ownership that came through the door. You know, they wanted to embrace the women's game. They wanted to bring the women's team into the main men's fold setup and fold. And, you know, fair play to them for that. Didn't do a huge amount more after that, but, you know, for that particular initiative, absolutely. You know, and I think, you know, we embraced that opportunity. Went on and won the FA Cup in 2012. Produced some of the, you know, some really sort of senior England internationals, the likes of Karen Carney, you know, they came through our academy ranks, you know, and we saw it as one club, but separate opportunities. So, you know, we were the first club in the top tier, and we was, to actually do a separate sponsorship deal, front to shirt sponsorship deal, to the men's team. You know, a lot of the men's teams used to like bundle the women's shirt package actually in the men's package to make it look a little bit more attractive. Or actually, do you know what? This is an opportunity in its own right. You know, as Adrian's alluded to, the matchday experiences are different. The demographic of the fan base are different. So this appeals to a totally different brand, and a brand that can add a lot of value to the women's game itself and to the growth and the participation. So that was a real kind of like, through that journey and that learning curve, that's where I've become really, really passionate about this. Got invited to be on the Women's Super League commercial committee as well. Mm-hmm. So had a big involvement in kind of like a lot of their big central deals, broadcast deals, had a lot of involvement in that. So for me, to see it from where it was to where it is today is unbelievable. Unfortunately, Birmingham went through a bit of turmoil with their women's game. There was a lack of investment, a lack of care, not from the actual staff on the ground, but just purely from an ownership perspective. But that was right for the club. Luckily now, new ownership, really embracing the women's team again, playing at St Andrews, so playing at the main stadia. And it's just great to see, it's really pleasing for the game in general that's happening.
Does that kind of mirror your experience when you were at West Brom?
If I actually just go back to Birmingham, it's probably more relevant, is when David Sullivan, David Gold and Karen were on their way out, was kind of, you could feel the vibe around the women space was moving. I don't think we sold any specific sponsorship around it, but it was just timing. Karen is probably one of the biggest advocates of women in sport that has ever
100%.
been. And I remember, I was on the senior management team at Birmingham, and there would be times where there'd be a magazine company come in, and Karen would be like, right, okay, and she would get all of her senior management women into an executive box, a photo shoot, and I wouldn't be involved in a couple of them. And I wasn't bothered by that. It wasn't something that was like really kind of, made me think I'm not going to get out of bed this morning. But it's just the way it was. Karen was huge around women in sport. She'd got a really strong senior management team of females with, men in there as well. And I think what happened was they were very much working independently. The women's team were working separately to the men's team. And I think if they had stayed at the club, I think it would have been a different arena. Right. It probably would have got the investment, but it was just at the time, obviously, they were getting rid of the club, they were moving on, and it was like, well, why start something that we can't finish? So I've seen it both sides, and from a West Brom perspective, I don't know. I just don't believe there was really the appetite for the women's game, and that may be, we were all a male board. There was every single person that sat on the board. I actually took over from a female when I walked in. So it wasn't the fact that we never spoke about it. It was just, there's no one knocking our door every month saying, come on, we can really make the West Brom ladies team something to be proud of. It was literally, we were just that heads down, men's team, keeping in the division, generating revenue, keeping the fans happy. It just never came on the table. It was never rejected. I categorically say that. But it just never sat in front of us as a business plan. Right, are we going to get behind this? I think we would have. If someone had sat down with us and said, right, here's a business plan and will the club back it, I think we'd have absolutely embraced it.
I think what I'd say as well, we obviously talk about the big superstars in the women's sport at the moment, and there's loads of kind of icons and idols that people will look up to. But again, what I'm finding now in our industry are there's so many people in business appointments that are similar. We spoke this week about Emily Frazer at Matchroom, haven't we? And the way she comes across in the Matchroom documentary that's out on Netflix at the moment. And again, I think of like Olivia, your daughter, or something like that, as an example of somebody to look at and view their story. She was on a podcast this week, High Performance, where she spoke about the sort of challenges she's faced at Matchroom, the journey she's been on. And again, I think that's just like a great example of go and watch it, go and listen to it and see where you can kind of go in sport now. And having that opportunity and that platform is outstanding.
From a recruitment perspective then, do you think those dual roles, there's a long way to go? I mean, are a lot of football clubs already set up to do that? Or actually, is there real opportunity?
It's mimicked by the pyramid, really. So all of the large WSL teams that are backed by bigger clubs as well will have their own identity now and their own leadership team. And I think, again, even looking at WSL 2, and look, Nikki Doucet has built out at WSL 2 now that there's a real infrastructure there. So I think that that's filtering down the league. And I've even worked at Tier 3 in the women's game recently. And it's really different and kind of like contrasting within each club. There's certain teams that are almost winning Tier 3 all the time, but not wanting to go up, because what that requires is really significant investment that I think some ownerships are still a little bit nervous of, okay, do we put that much money into that we won't see the benefit from for a few years, or do we keep winning Tier 3? But then again, that creates challenges for players and staff that are going, well, actually, no, I want to I want to go and play in the WSL, for example. So it's a real difficult and balancing sort of time at the moment, whereby there are significant investments from a women's team that need to be sort of hit to go up, and that's worth noting and kind of highlighting. But there are equally teams, again, Plymouth are a great example. They're building Falston Park. There's going to be a women's specific area at there, and their plan is long term to, actually we're investing in this and we want to go to the very top, but we want to do it sensibly and sustainably.
You mentioned about the women's team playing at St Andrews, but do you think we're going to see that actually where the women's side of the football club's going to have their own stadium? Is that where the future lies?
Yeah, 100%. I think as Harry has alluded to, there are certain clubs that are very, very advanced, embracing the women's game, and there are certain clubs that are a little bit slower in coming up to date, and there's more and more investment that's needed. For teams, hence the reason why, promotion sometimes is a little bit nerve-wracking, because promotion comes investment comes money, and that's to obviously invest in, the playing infrastructure, the stadium infrastructure, because not all of them play at the main stadium at the moment. Some of them are at secondary stadiums that don't have the relevant broadcast facilities to go
floodlights.
There are minimum operating standards to be able to go into those leagues. So, it can be a little bit scary, but the future is bright, and you can see it. You can see, again, without, Man City have already done it. They've got their own separate purpose-built women's stadium that's at the Etihad campus. As part of Birmingham City's plan for the sports quarter, there is a separate 10, 12,000 seater stadium purely for their women's team. So, and I know that there are a lot of other clubs that are embracing that, and they do want a separate identity and a separate stadium for the home of the women's team, and I think it's really important.
They have to do it right as well, if you know what I mean, because I think last year Chelsea committed to playing all their women's home team games at Stamford Bridge for a period, and I think they made a really significant loss in that period because it kind of didn't translate in the way it wanted to. So I think having that plan and a structure and a bit of a roadmap as to where it's going is really important.
And there will be commercial value around clubs. Chelsea probably have done a little bit of an internal ownership, kind of rebadge investment arrangement around their women's team. But it has a value. Someone's placed a value on it. And, it's been organised internally that the women's team has X value that sits on the balance sheet of the club. So club value as well in terms of separate entities. Ownership groups will be thinking, well, hold on, what's Manchester City Ladies' value? Globally, it's going to have a value. So that there is a longer game with this. It's not all about money, but fortunately, football is it's the merry-go-round of money.
That's going to be my next question, really, in terms of, is it like the Wild West at the moment in terms of putting value on things? Because relatively, it's so new, or are you just looking at what happens in the men's game with sponsorship and you go, well, it's going to be somewhere around that? How does it work?
It's a lot cleverer than that now. The metrics that come out of TV audiences, literally you can value a sponsorship deal in any sport based on what comes off the back of it. Obviously you need to have 6-12 months worth of data to be able to put into a matrix. But you can, if someone says what's X brand worth for Y women's team, you can get a number on that, as you can do with the male. Exactly.
Ed, it's worth saying as well that these numbers and the sort of scope that this is going at is exponential. The growth that women's sport is going through, it's not just sort of ticking along year on year. This is going flatline up sort of thing at the moment. NWSL franchises in America are selling for $50 million. Wow. There's really significant global plays here as well. Saudi, a lot of Saudi women's teams now acquiring big players and big talent for big ticket sort of transfer fees and things like that. So where's it going to be in 10 years? That is the question,
We've done some business. Look, Alicia Lehman, she's probably the highest profile women's footballer on the planet.
Follower-wise, definitely.
If you look on social media perspective, from follower perspective, 16 million followers. We've done sponsorship deals for her because literally people just want to tap into her base. And the irony is, if you do go on to have a look at her channels, 84% of her followers are men.
Right.
So there you go.
If you look at where it's gone from 10 years ago to now,
it's a different world.
It's a different world, So in 10 years' time, it's going to be a different world again, especially with obviously the new version of Obviously, the women's pyramid with Nikki Doucette leading the charge, who, by the way, is an outstanding operator. I met her several occasions. You know, I think there's only one way it's going, genuinely. You know, broadcasters want to get more and more involved. Really cool brands want to get involved. You know, some of the brands that get involved are, you know, very, very credible, have got unbelievable values as a brand, you know, and they just see the vision of, you know, women's football and the growth of women's football aligning with what their objectives are, and you know, it's really cool to see.
The best thing to look at as well is attendances, because look at the MLS, for example, on the men's front at the moment. That in itself, aligned with the USL, is growing massively year on year, but they're still struggling to get the attendances. If you look at the Women's World Cup final, just over the last sort of 7 or 8 years, I think there was 75,000 there last year. Prior to that, in Canada, I think the one that Nikki Doucette talks about when America won, there was 50-odd thousand. Every year and year on year, these attendances are going up, which is such a great benchmark, because that's what some territories do struggle with, isn't it? It's like, look at the Club World Cup in the summer. We couldn't get bums on seats, really, but actually in the women's game, it's all backed by viewership.
I think a lot of the where the women's game, in particular football, does struggle, you know, and I don't think this is. I think it's fixture congestion. There is that much football going on. It's kind of like, okay, well,
where do you fit?
Where do you fit? You know, how can you get that real sort of dedicated time slot that doesn't compete with Premier League, La Liga, other big sporting events, F1, whatever it might be. You know, to have a real focus on that, and I think that has been a little bit of a challenge. You know, and also, you know, they've looked at like Saturday mornings. You know, so Saturday mornings like 11 o'clock kickoff. The problem there is you've got a lot of grassroots football going on, you know, and a lot of the kids that want to go to the games are actually playing their own games, you know. So there's all those kind of things and all those challenges, but we are getting through it, and you know, it is starting to work better and better and better. But we focus a lot on football, but I think women's sport in general, you know, I was listening to Talk Sport the other day, and the World's Strongest Woman was on Talk Sport. You know, and she's been World's Strongest Woman, I think it's like 3 or 4 times, been competing for the last 10 years. When she was competing previously, they were in a car park of a gym. That's where the World's Strongest Woman was competing. To last year, she was in a proper multi-purpose arena in front of 11,000 fans. You know, so I think that's just testament to everyone buying into women's sport in general. I think it's a really good case study.
I think it's interesting as well. You mentioned about different sports. I mean, I went to the 100 in the summer at Edgbaston, and you know, they had the women's game on before the men's. And I took the family there, and it was a lovely atmosphere, you know. And then obviously later on, we're in the Eric Holly stand. You know how that gets. So a few beers are starting to flow.
God, yeah, the Holly's
and then everyone's flowing
times
in for the men's game, and you're like, actually, I've got my kids. They're a bit young. Maybe we'll go home now, kind of thing. So it does have a very different atmosphere, doesn't it? And I kind of go, I'd love to go and watch that women's cricket match with my kids. I'll probably go with some mates to the later game and have a few beers, but it is a whole different thing, isn't it, really?
And Harry was telling me there's actually going to be a tennis match between...
Oh, yeah, there is.
Arena Sabalenka's playing Nick Kyrgios in an exhibition. This will have happened when this goes out, but I think it's due to be tomorrow, where we are now. And it'll be a really interesting... I mean, again, from an exhibition point of view, it's great. People do still want to see how good is Arena against Nick. And I think she'll have a really good chance. So it'd be interesting to see the result of that.
We've sort of talked about visibility, and that's always been the argument, hasn't it, about how can the women's sport grow if they're not getting the visibility through the media. Those sponsorship deals, they're not going to get that kind of visibility that they need to then flourish. But it's tough. As you say, fixture congestion seems to be a thing. But do you think the media needs to step up a little bit more and make more space? I know they have moved, but is there a way to go on that?
I think the one thing that the media will always be looking at is, obviously they've got some big bills per annum. So, you know, they've got to pay for the Premier League rights. Those can only be returned, their investments, by viewerships in terms of getting however many games they've committed to. So all of a sudden it's kind of like, well, they'll be looking at what's the value of the women's game to us. And by putting that, they've got to select their viewerships for their advertisers, obviously. You know, that's the driver as well and the subscribers, the people that buy, the packages. So women's anything to do with women's sport has to have its place, but they'll be very strategic about where it is placed.
Right.
So the big games, naturally, you've seen majority of them on BBC. You know, if you've got any of the Euro finals, semi-finals, they're finding a place for those because they know that's going to return 5, 6, 7 million viewers pretty consistently. So I think broadcasters are probably sat there in the scheduling teams having very kind of interesting debates around it. But unfortunately, the guys at the top of the pyramid in the boardrooms will literally be looking at the spreadsheets.
Of course they will.
And they'll be saying, okay, right, well, this is what we've just paid the Premier League. So we've got to make sure we get our 200 and X games scheduled in. And right, we'll look about the women after that. I think that's, I might be wrong, but I can generally know the way Sky would look at this. They'll be, BBC probably a little bit more liberal, just because, it's a kind of, it's probably cheaper to buy the women's rights than it is the men's. They're not going to get, they've got Match of the Day for Premier League and that's all they've got, because Sky have locked it out and TNT. So I think the women's game is value, but I think, some of the numbers we're hearing and seeing in the women's game from a sponsorship perspective, I don't think the advertisers and the sponsors are looking at the actual real numbers in terms of they're not making the major decisions on how many people are watching. They're just going with the whole euphoria of the women's game, but also the spread as well. Yeah. It's very, it's not like a male game where literally it's like very much, 80 odd percent male, 20% female. You see like 50-50. It's like, it's kind of really interesting to look at actually, the stats.
Any final thoughts then before we draw to a close of this episode for women's sport and the sponsorship opportunities that come with it, and also the placements in terms of candidates and roles that are coming up, Harry?
I just wanted to mention time of the year. We're sort of approaching Christmas, dare I say it. World Darts Championships. Let's keep an eye out on Bo Greaves. For me, I'm a huge darts fan, by the way, but I think she has got a serious chance of having a really good Ali Pali. The Grand Slam of Darts is happening again tomorrow for us here, so it'll be really interesting. She's in a really difficult group, but I think she won 50 games in a row at a period this year in the women's game. Some of her averages are outstanding. She beat Luke Littler last week in an exhibition. I think she'll make the Premier League next year because Barry Hearn's very clever. He'll always he puts people in if it's a meritocracy if they're good enough. But also I think she definitely could compete next year in the Premier League. And I think it'd be fantastic for darts. I really do. Yeah. That's my final thoughts.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree. And I think from a brand perspective, all I would say is, and I've worked in the inner sanctum of a football club and I know there's lots going on all over the place, but, just treat the women's side of the game just with that little bit more respect, in terms of actually, do you know what, put that little bit more time, that little bit more effort into actually really understanding, okay, well, what can the women's team offer a brand that the men's team can't? And there is a huge amount, and there are so many brands out there that, that you can speak a different language to, and get some really cool brands. I mean, the final sponsorship deal we did for the women's team was with TGI Fridays. They'd never get involved in the men's game. They never would, because you're talking to a different audience and, just treat it with respect because it deserves the respect and it's only going one way and that's proven. It's, so yeah, that's my final thought.
My final thought is, everybody's freaking out about the betting companies coming off front of shirts of the men's team. Look at your women's team as a subsidizer. Break out those bits of inventory that you've probably given away in some of the male-driven sponsorships. There's definitely, if you are and you do have, a women's team associated club, and it's a forged relationship and it's solid. Have a chat. Get an inventory list together for the women's team. You'd be surprised at what is available. And try and get out and market and sell it. We're fortunate enough. We did a deal for Plymouth Argyle. We managed to get their front of shirt deal done for their women's team with a brand called Dumbia, which is, believe it or not, they're an abattoir in Plymouth, but they're like a global business, a £1 billion business. We spent a bit of time focusing our efforts on that asset, and we secured it. So it's possible.
Interesting. Well, I guess the final thing, we've mentioned a few names about big characters in women's sport. If you had the opportunity, past or present, icons in women's sport, who would you like to be looking after to go, I could do some great deals for them at the moment? Who would you want to focus on?
Good question.
For me, I mean, I've always been a huge Serena Williams fan. I think she's just, in terms of like, how she handled the game of tennis and how she just, the credibility, the hard work she put in. I think she's just an inspiration to, female sport and to, and to people playing the game. That would be one for me. But there's been many. There's been a huge amount of unbelievable athletes, you know, and up and coming ones as well. We were talking about, well, you've already mentioned Bo. We were talking about like Keely Hodgkinson, athlete, you know, a real, just not only an unbelievable athlete, but an unbelievable person, kind, caring, and literally, you know, able to really kind of like inspire the younger generation. And I think that's really important.
I think if you look at, for me, like Jessica Ennis, she's literally, she's an ambassador for this country, you know, UK ambassador in sport. She's very, very credible. Former armed forces, I think she came from originally. But she literally has she empowered people, I think. You know, she just stand out for me in terms of, you know, she's very well presented in terms of anything she does in the media. And sometimes, unfortunately, I think some female presenters have been caught out a little bit from maybe not preparing or just not knowing what they're talking about. And literally, social media would just jump on that quick as a flash and literally say, look at what this lady has just said about this game. It's like, is she watching another fixture? And it's like, it's unfortunate, but with media, you've got to be really careful what you say, because people will literally wind it back and say, that's not right, or that's a lot of rubbish. So I think with the profiles that you know women do have in sport now, the ones that are and have done it on the pitch or on the court or on the track, everybody listens to, because it's like, well, you've won medals, you've won trophies, and there's no kind of, you can't argue with that. So that's why I look at it.
One sport that I love is mixed martial arts, so UFC. And Ronda Rousey's rise to UFC was unbelievable. She was she was the biggest star in the UFC for a period until she ran into Holly Holm and Amanda Nunes. But I think there's a space in that sport again now for a really big superstar. Conor McGregor's dropped down. There's Potan, and there's you know, is it Topuria as well? Because I think we've spoken about him, Ila Topuria. Yeah. But there's Dakota Ditcheva, who's English. She's English and Bulgarian. She's sort of dual heritage. She's 15-0 in MMA, and she is going to be another superstar, I think, just very similar to that Ronda Rousey sort of rise, I think. She's currently fighting under the PFL, but I'm certain she'll reach the UFC. And you could just see her on billboards in Times Square and all that sort of stuff, a bit like Ronda Rousey was.
Interesting. Good place to leave it, guys. We'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
Cheers.
Cheers.